and welcome back to Wired for Change. Today's episode is going to be our fourth in the Digital Transformation Dream Team series, Creating the Conditions for Adaptability. Before I get into it, I'll just explain that the Dream Team series is about 16 archetypes that I've created that belong on your team for a dream team for digital transformation or transformation of any kind. It's all based on experiences and observations from myself and others that I've spoken to around what really works and what's really needed. Because after all, it all comes down to people, doesn't it? And we're all searching for the right people and the right roles and structure for our teams, because that's what's going to carry it through at the end of the day. Despite all the technology and systems and processes that are needed, you've got to have the right team in place. And that's what has helped me to succeed in all of my transformations for certain. And I think that you probably say the same thing. It's about attitude and adaptability. From a leadership perspective, I loved the point that Derek Dobson made in our last episode, which was about ensuring that we've got the humility and reflection and conviction needed. And that comes from knowing your place in the story. And so what you want to do is you want to gather together a dream team of people who understand their place in the story and understand that the story is bigger than any one person. Every person on that team should know that and should know that the role that they play is such a critical one as well. Sometimes it's about understanding the roles that we have today and then just tuning them a little bit for transformation, because transformation demands so much of us. So, for example, you might be a strategic communicator today, but you might need to be more of a strategic diplomat tomorrow within a transformation context. And for each of these archetypes, I like to choose a historical figure to personify that role for us, just to make it a little bit more human. And of course, who doesn't like a good story? So I invite you to subscribe to my podcast if you are interested in change and transformation. And I would love to hear your feedback on critical roles that you've had on your teams that have pulled you through transformation as well. Always open to feedback here, and love it when people subscribe as well. So thanks for watching again. So let's get into our episode for today. In every transformation, there comes a moment, or maybe multiple moments, where your priorities change, where something happens from the outside that just isn't anticipated. Perhaps something within the team has changed and it really just shakes the ground under your feet. How do you ensure that you've built a team that's going to be able to adapt? How do you ensure that you've got an organization that can adapt despite what might be happening, despite needing to adapt perhaps several times or pivot several times within the transformation? How do you keep them all on board and aligned? A couple of examples that I could share. So I've seen an organization where maybe you're at the beginning and you're gathering your requirements, and suddenly you're faced with the understanding that the change or the gap is much bigger than you at first anticipated. And it's something that you're not very well prepared for in terms of revisiting like what needs to be accomplished, how long it might take, or how many things might change, or how many systems or processes might change. The change is just much bigger than what you expected. And now your organization needs to adapt, or your teams need to adapt to that change. And that can be quite a shaking thing for them, because perhaps they've got long held beliefs that are now being challenged. And how do you prepare them for that? How do you give them the culture that is resilient enough so that they don't, feel like failures or decide to hide or just change, from something that is, very far away to something that needs to be much, much closer, and to understand what that gap is. That can be a very challenging thing for an organization to adapt to. Something else that I've often heard about are organizations that need to adapt in the face of, what's perceived as failure. Perhaps they've been building a new digital platform for some time, and then they've launched it, and things really didn't go as expected. For a number of different reasons. How do they adapt to that when they've lost perhaps a lot of the trust that they held with their stakeholders, with their clients, with their internal teams? Is the organization brittle, and will it break in the face of something that is such a big change or realization? Or has it been prepared to adapt and learn and keep going? Do they have the language that is needed to do that? A third example is sometimes an external stimulus that can happen. Perhaps your teams are ticking away at a transformation, and an external thing happens that no one could have foreseen, like COVID, for example, when that hits a team and you're trekking along and suddenly, all of your operations are disrupted. Or perhaps there's a cybersecurity incident and everything has changed all of a sudden in the blink of an eye, and everyone's got to put down their tools or adapt to something that is completely new for them, and they don't know how to behave because they haven't been there before. And already in a transformation, often you're doing things that you've never done before. So how do you recover from that, and how do you adapt to the new way of working that you might have? So these are all examples of changes that you will require and that will happen and that will require your organization to adapt. And how do you prepare them for that? Adaptability isn't just about reacting fast. It is about ensuring that you've built a system and culture that can bend without breaking. So, today we'll explore three roles that help organizations stay flexible and focused: the adaptive organization designer, the velocity catalyst, and the strategic diplomat. We're going to introduce you to these roles and to the historical figures that might play these roles if you could create a truly magical dream team that spans across time. Let's get into it. So, the first one I mentioned was the adaptive organization designer. And for this role, I've chosen Florence Nightingale. If you think Florence Nightingale only as the lady with the lamp, you're missing her superpower. Nightingale was a fierce systems thinker who used evidence and design to completely reshape healthcare operations. During the Crimean War, she found hospitals in complete disarray. Soldiers were lying dying not just from injuries, but from infections, poor hygiene, and overcrowded, inefficient layouts. She collected data, she redesigned wards, she reorganized how healthcare was delivered, and in doing so, she saved thousands of lives. In today's transformation context, the adaptive organization designer is the person who can look at your org chart, your team, and operational rhythms and ask, are we structured for what's coming next? They don't just move boxes on that chart, they rethink incentives, feedback loops, roles, reporting, and coordination. Especially during periods of change, this role is essential for reducing friction and helping teams to pivot effectively. You might know them as an organizational design consultant, an HR strategist, or a transformation lead, but this archetype plays a deeper role when it comes to high impact transformation. They bring structure to ambiguity, and sometimes in the face of unanticipated change that can happen quite quickly. I got to a point in a transformation where the CEO quite brilliantly turned to me and said, Amy, what is it that you need? And instinctively, I said, I need a new team. But it wasn't about replacing the teams that I had. And we had already made several structural changes to bring a number of different teams under my portfolio to centralize them and to help with the smooth orchestration of the transformation. But we needed people who were also from within other teams to be seconded to a core team to drive that transformation. And little did I know, it was the beginning of the dream team for that transformation. It was a team that was going to sit at the nexus of everything based on the organization that we were working with at the time. And for that organization at that time, it was the best solution. I didn't have an organizational designer or adaptive organization designer in that case, but we definitely could have used one, particularly when predicting some of the outputs in terms of, what would change. Instead, we designed it in a way that we would be taking in different changes and redesigning them within that core team, or having that core team learn how to lead the redesign of those changes, working together with external stakeholders, and working very closely with them so that it wasn't, being designed for them, it was being designed with them in more of a service design way. But that core team was leading that design and ensuring that we were effectively gathering that feedback and effectively setting it up so those teams, and maybe those teams have changed, but those teams could then kind of pick it up again, because it was never meant to stay within that core team. That core team was not going to be the permanent owners of that new process or solution. It was always going to go back. So everything was designed so that it would go back out again. And sometimes that external structure to the core team was going to change as well. So there was a really interesting dynamic there that worked for that situation. So it's something that you can do on the fly, but if you have someone to help you, particularly if you're doing it at scale, in a large implementation, for example, you might have many, many consultants coming from the outside to join your internal teams. Well, what does that organization look like? How temporary are those roles? And what are the changed roles that you need internally in order to ensure that everything is flowing smoothly, and that expectations are set well, and that people who will be staying with you for a longer term are set up to succeed, and that those teams are set up to succeed. It's a lot to manage, and you need to be someone's job to think through how that's going to work and how you're setting expectations for the future of that organization. So that if someone's role changes today, well, how long is it going to change for? Are they going to be promoted in the future? What team are they going to be part of in the future? They will all have those questions. Everybody will want to know how these things will change for them. And while you might not always have the answers, by having someone who is leading that, you will have a solid foundation that you can continue to grow and adapt. And usually, the systems or the teams that have grown organically to suit the organization at that time, pre transformation, are not going to be the ones that you're going to have at the end. I'll also have to mention, there's so much change happening right now that an organizational design perspective is going to be a very critical one when it comes to how AI has impacted organizations, of course. Everyone is questioning, the size of their future teams and the roles that will be needed and whether or not their jobs will still be there and what are those jobs of the future. And it's important to have that conversation taking place in a way that is, well structured, and supportive, and responsive to people's questions. We won't be able to anticipate everything, but we will need the strength to adapt. I'm going to move on to the second rule now. The second one we're talking about today is one that I call the velocity catalyst. And for this role, I've picked Taiichi Ohno. Now, Taiichi Ohno might not be a household name, but if you've heard of Lean or the Toyota production system, then you know his legacy. Ohno revolutionized how work flows. He introduced principles like just-in-time inventory and empowered frontline workers to stop the production line to fix problems at the source. The result was faster delivery, better quality, and a culture of continuous improvement. The velocity catalyst in your transformation is the one who constantly asks, what's slowing us down, and what do we need to remove to flow better? Sometimes that's a leader who is stepping in and saying, what can I do to remove barriers for you? And in fact, I would say that during a transformation or during innovation or a time of significant change, when you're building something new of some kind, then you need someone who is actively removing barriers for you. So that person needs to be empowered to do that. And usually they need to be reporting to the CEO or a very senior leader. If you're feeling sluggish in your transformation, you really need to find your velocity catalyst, whether that's one or more than one person, and then listen to them. I've been in many transformation environments where new ways of working were needed in order to move forward at a pace that was required and with the trust that was required, and often with the transparency that was required. And that doesn't always come naturally to people if you don't have the culture for it that has been already set in place. In some cases, I've seen that lean was needed in order to create a safe space for challenging existing processes and for being transparent about what was actually being done, in the current state. And to get everyone on the same page with respect to how to think about the future of those processes and whether they would be needed. And that it was okay to think that way, particularly or even when there were people who were very dependent on those existing processes to even have a job. On the agile side of things, I wanted to mention that it's important to get an agile coach. And I've never been a purist when it comes to agile, particularly in transformation, because so many things are changing, and the culture is changing as well. But I think that, hiring a coach who really puts trust building at the center of things can really help foster the culture that's needed to move forward and get past some existing belief systems that might not work as well in a future where everything is changing. Not every team will be able to adopt new practices or ways of working at the same pace. And so, what I usually do is I take an inventory of the experience and skills and aptitudes across teams, and recognize where there is that experience to help shepherd along the rest of the team. And those people are generally very happy to be tapped on because they've been thinking and wanting to move in new ways, probably since they joined. Set up rhythms for stakeholders who are not part of the core teams. So one of the most successful practices that I've used was to introduce the idea of, a regular rhythm where there was a demo. And that's part of normal agile practice. But really having all the teams work on almost a heartbeat and inviting all the stakeholders and in the entire organization, in fact, to these demos, and having all the teams, share something in the demo helps the whole organization to keep up and learn at that regular pace, and to ask questions. And while it might sound like an obvious thing to some folks to be having those regular kind of sharing sessions with the rest of the organization so that everyone can join and get together, it's something that does take time to build, I've found. And one of the things that can help accelerate this practice is really having your CEO and leaders from across the organization join those sessions. Ask questions, show that it's okay to ask those questions and that it's encouraged to ask them, and that there are no dumb questions in those demos, and to show that they're engaged. And that really helps to accelerate the process of keeping everyone in new regular rhythms that they might not have had before. And then that's going to help build trust and bridges across the organization in a way that is a real joy to see. One little warning: beware of junior consultants that might come in and might not have actually lived through an experience where they have worked in one way and transformed completely to a different way of working. I've encountered many of these more junior consultants who are very well meaning, but are just speaking from a textbook, for instance, and not making that real for people, and haven't really adopted or gone through that challenge of needing to adopt and learn and slip back a bit and then need to push forward again. So always ask questions about their experience and what they lived, because that lived experience, as always, is key to understand. The third archetype that we're looking at today is the strategic diplomat. For this role, we're using Eleanor Roosevelt and inviting her into our conversation. Few people have quietly reshaped international systems like Eleanor Roosevelt. She didn't just advocate behind the scenes. She chaired the drafting committee of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. She brought people together across ideologies and nations by focusing on shared values. The strategic diplomat is the person in your transformation who helps groups align when tensions are high, and in a transformation when aren't tensions high. If you're executing, it means tensions are high. They translate priorities, facilitate difficult conversations, and help people feel heard. They aren't flashy negotiators. They're connected and trusted connectors. In a fast-changing environment, this role is often overlooked, but it's vital. The strategic diplomat helps teams adapt without fracturing. They create safety for hard conversations, and that's what keeps change moving. In your organization, they might be a program manager, they might be a chief of staff, or even someone in corporate affairs or internal communications, or they might be multiple people. To truly support digital transformation, this role must be tuned for systems thinking, psychological safety, and network decision making. And there's training and coaches, for that, as well. And there are people who have that aptitude for systems thinking and connecting the dots that can help them be that strategic diplomat for you. Now, it's worth distinguishing the strategic diplomat from the change whisperer. The change whisperer is another archetype that I've introduced previously, and for that role, we had Harriet Tubman play that part. Now, there's a difference between them, but they are both needed. The change whisperer is deeply embedded in the day-to-day. They are living the current state, and they have excellent working relationships with other people who are living that current state. They're trusted by frontline staff and leaders alike, and they help translate change initiatives into language and workflows that feel real, not just speaking about a change, but really speaking within that change and to that change, and able to paint the picture and walk first and have other people follow them. The strategic diplomat, on the other hand, often operates across functions. They might mediate between silos or anticipate friction between different groups. They're building strategic bridges through alignment and facilitation, and they're working behind the scenes to ensure transformation efforts don't misalign and derail. I would also say that a good example of this is navigating the friction between ongoing operations priorities and transformation priorities. So imagine you've got a transformation that is moving down the track like a train. And once you start a transformation, it's hard to stop because often you've got implementation teams and vendors who are charging you, by the hour, by the day, and you've got milestones to meet, and it's very complex. And that train is moving. Once it's gone, it's gone. But then you've got an operational priority that comes in. Maybe it's your biggest client. Maybe it's a contract that absolutely has to land. Otherwise, you don't have the revenues to continue with the transformation, for instance. Or it's some other priority, and there's tension between those priorities. So, how do you ensure that you have those conversations and navigate that competition in priorities and focus for that or for the organization? How do you ensure that you've got those safe conversations and it doesn't just become frustration, and one doesn't become completely derailed at the expense of another, unless that is truly the intention? So that is one example of needing a strategic diplomat or more than one strategic diplomat to help through that challenge. It's critical, really, for creating that safety for when the organization needs to adapt. Another example might be with the example of that software failing in the field for that organization and needing to be rebuilt. Tensions were high on all sides, and a strategic diplomat was needed to go and speak to each of the customers that was affected by that challenge. In the field, and an awareness and an ability to listen to what those clients went through when this happened to them was very important to do. Otherwise, there would have been no way to move forward in the future or to regain and rebuild that trust. It wasn't about sweeping failure under the rug or not addressing it. It was about putting in place all the connected tissue that's needed in order to ensure that you recover and assess and are able to bring things back to life, and to learn from the experience and to communicate, what do we think about this experience? How are we learning from it? How have things changed? How are things different? And how do we value people and value our efforts moving forward as well? And that they continue to be valued and that it's safe to keep going. Appropriate action and communication was critical to that organization so that they could adapt, learn, and build the team and plan for succeeding. So, in the context of transformation, adaptability isn't just a personal trait, it's an important one. And that ability to deal with ambiguity is an important personal trait. But here we need to scale it so that it is a team capability and an organization capability. The adaptive organization designer helps you reshape structure. The velocity catalyst keeps the momentum alive, and the strategic diplomat protects the relational glue that holds the transformation together. And they're not just looking at the transformation again, but they're also looking at the other pressures that the organization might be under and know the operational needs in addition to the transformational ones and understand that those need to be balanced. And sometimes that means a conversation with the CEO or with the board. And sometimes that can be a difficult conversation. But it is very hard to do both at the same time, both the operational and the transformation. And that will be one of the key tensions that your strategic diplomat and your leaders will need to manage. If you want your organization to thrive through uncertainty, don't just focus on technology. Ensure that you focus on your team and the foundation of trust that you're building. Thank you for listening to Wired for Change and to this episode. And again, I ask you to subscribe if you've enjoyed listening to this episode, or if you want to contribute to the future and think about how you can change for your organization and help change the teams within and support the change that they're trying to make and your execution teams are trying to make. Be sure to just check out Substack for other content as well and follow along on LinkedIn or wherever you enjoy consuming your content. Once again, thank you for listening to Wired for Change. Take care.